Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Finding You podcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, July 28th, 2026. Tonight, I'm talking about the effects of parental anxiety on the child. As I always signal to you when I do these kinds of parent-child broadcasts, I want to remember that it is as important, maybe even arguably more important, if you have children, to think about this topic, this subject, through the lens of the child that you are, your childhood that you experience. So I think a lot of people, because of the anxiety that they have about raising children to be safe and to be well, they're kind of compelled to think about the ways that they can do it better and think about all the information that they can take in. But this is one of those topics, maybe as much as any topic, that requires you to take stock of your own anxiety, to understand your own background and how you developed to the person that you are today to survive. So with that, let me talk about some of our housekeeping items. Excuse me. First and foremost, if you're looking for months worth of therapy in a handful of days, the Finding You Intensive is that offering. That's what we created it for. It's a deep dive to understand your history, to go through experiential exercises where you can understand how you were built and how that path, that way of adapting is now contributing to some of the problems and challenges that you experience. So it doesn't matter if you're coming because you have a loved one who's struggling with addiction or mental health. Maybe it's a point in your marriage or in your career or in your life when you're looking to make a critical decision. Doesn't matter what it is. We want to understand the decisions and the way that you're going through life in the context of your history. So a Finding You Intensive, it's 7 people, 5 days, all inclusive. It's a springboard into your work if you don't know what your work is. And maybe better than work, it's a dive inward to look at yourself. And also it is a way to connect that past to what's going on. So August 5th through 9th, there may be a spot left. It may have closed. So if you're interested, contact us sooner rather than later, September 9th after that. Also, we are having a couples intensive, Finding You Intensive. So I'm really going to offer the same kind of programming, but we're going to do it in a couple format. So if you want to come and do your work with your spouse, this is a great opportunity. November 11th through 15th, I'll be running that with my wife. That may be full again. So if you're interested, contact us sooner rather than later. For all of their inquiries, for private intensives, for couples or for families, if you're looking to attend one of our support groups, which is on the third Wednesday of each month, the next one being August 19th, email us at info@findingyouprograms.com or go to our website portal. We also now are collaborating with other parents like me. So each Saturday at 9:30 a.m. Mountain Time, they host a support group that is based on the principles of Finding You. So September 25th, each month, the meeting occurs on a Saturday. Each weekend, I'm messing this up. The meeting occurs 9:30 on Saturday. So if you want to attend, reach out to us or go to oplm.com. This is a free offering for OPLM, for Finding You participants, Finding You listeners. If you're looking for a coach or a therapist who works in this model, who can support you on this journey, reach out to us and we'll be happy to do our best to set you up with a coach or a therapist that can assist you with this work. I'm very excited to be going to the Art of Living Retreat Center. This is going to be another iteration of our Audacity to Be You workshop that Emma and I will be running. So Emma, my daughter, myself, September 27th through October 2nd in Boone, North Carolina at the Art of Living Retreat Center. If you're interested in attending this dynamic workshop, it's about $500 for the entire week. You have to find your own housing. They have housing available also. But the class itself costs $500. September 27th through October 7th, this is your opportunity. So go to their website at www.artoflivingretreatcenter.org, or again, you can contact us on our website portal and we'll help get you connected to them. If you are looking to join the Inner Circle has now launched. This is a subscription to the podcast, which gives you a couple of hours a month that aren't available to the general public. And also, you can attend these broadcasts live. And especially during the Ask Me Anything episode, you can ask questions as you go. And with that, let's jump into tonight's topic. Let's talk about anxiety as a clinical principle. So from the diagnostic manual, we read that anxiety is a psychological and physiological state characterized by somatic, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral components. The root meaning of the word anxiety is to vex or to trouble. In either presence or absence of psychological stress, anxiety can create feelings of fear, worry, uneasiness, and dread. Anxiety is considered to be a normal reaction to a stressor. It may help someone deal with a difficult situation by prompting them to cope with it. When anxiety becomes excessive, it may fall under the classification of an anxiety disorder. So there's some really core principles that I want to talk about tonight that guide this work. And that is to understand that we're talking about anxiety not as a state, but more as a trait. When we talk about trait anxiety, we talk about the underlying structure of our psychology, of our psyche. When we talk about state anxiety, it can be in a given moment in response to a stressor. But if somebody suffers from trait anxiety, if it seems to be a theme, if it comes out in a lot of situations and relationships, then what is happening is your brain is interpreting everyday events as high stakes, pass or fail, life or death. Everything becomes a threat in that state that happens if you're living in that chronic state as a way of being. It feels like there's never enough time. We talk about in the treatment industry sometimes this idea of future tripping, which is always looking forward, always planning. In contrast to an anxious personality, somebody who has a regulated nervous system, who has a stronger core sense of self and foundation, realizes that whatever happens, they'll be okay and up to the task. They don't have to plan. They don't have to be hypervigilant. They don't have to imagine all the contingencies. One of the things that I often take issue with when people talk about anxiety, they talk about this idea that worrying about things in the future never helped anybody or never helps. And my experience is, as somebody who suffers from anxiety, who grew up within a home where I had an anxious mother, that anxiety, if it draws me to planning and thinking, I can kind of stave off the failure and the pain. I can kind of prevent it by over-planning and overcompensating. But the problem with that is living in that constant state of fear and always having to anticipate that kind of hypervigilance costs my nervous system, my psyche, and my body a great deal. So I don't take the position that worrying about things in the future will never help you. I do think that worrying about the future, especially if you can turn that worry into a specific fear and you can turn it into an actionable item, I think anxiety and fear can really benefit you. But as always, there's a cost. There's the pro and the con of everything. And the con or the cost of chronic anxiety is your physical body breaks down. And your relationships really are hampered by anxiety because you can't make the connection, because you're too busy trying to control the other person or the circumstances. So you lose connection with others. And you're acting in service of your own fear. So if you think about this in the role of a parent, your anxiety prevents you from showing up to your child and their challenges in the service of their needs, of what they need to support them. I should make clear at the outset that anxiety or fear are normal responses to life. But the thing that we must remember is that anxiety lies to us. Anxiety tells us that things are high stakes, that tells us that things are pass or fail, that tells us that failure is a catastrophe, that setbacks or detours on some predetermined prescribed path, that a detour or a setback is a disaster. When in reality, the setbacks and the detours become our life. They become the things that teach us, and the thing that gives life its richness and its flavor. So you can't not feel anxiety, folks, when you're presented with something stressful, like a child struggling with addiction or mental health, or a spouse or a friend or yourself. You can't. This is not about not feeling what you feel. I think the biggest misunderstanding when I talk about this work, that at times I might seem to suggest that you just don't feel anxious. But the fact of the matter is If you do, you do. And if you come from a family where you developed an anxious attachment style, which most people have some of, many have a lot of, then you're going to be riddled with anxiety at common everyday life occurrences. So there's a saving grace in all of this. The work is not to not be afraid. The work is to go take care of your fear in therapy, in a support group with other adults. It's a signal that something inside of you needs attention. And if you don't attend to it, your interventions, your relationships, your conversations with the people that you care about most will be significantly compromised. Fear blinds us and lies to us. And when we're operating in service of that fear, it doesn't matter virtually what we do. That energy is getting exchanged to the child. So it's high stakes, it's threatening. There's never enough time. It has to be now. I remember years ago, I learned by watching somebody on my team, I learned to slow down my responses to emails or messages from my work team that triggered me. Again, I felt the fear. I wasn't not going to feel it. I felt the anxiety, the agitation, the trigger. I wasn't not going to feel those things. And trying not to feel those things meant largely that I was going to act from them. But what it suggested to me is I had some work to do with it. And simply slowing down was a kind of antidote to anxiety. Slowing down was signaling to my body that it wasn't life-threatening and it wasn't something that needed my immediate attention or response. So I could take some time regulating. If it happened late in the day, I could sleep. And sometime later, the next day maybe, I could then respond from a place of self instead of the fear. So our attachment histories, our chronic exposure to big people in our lives is going to be colored by their ability to own and take responsibility for their own anxiety. And if they don't, in the ways that I'm going to describe, have already talked about tonight, if they don't take the responsibility, then I, as the child, am left holding the bag. I will sense that the big person who's there to care for me is compromised in some way. And then I will act in ways to take care of them. And while that might seem like an empathic response from a child, the cost of it is my developing self. And this is the most important thing I will say this entire broadcast. That if you grow up with somebody that has a lot of anxiety, unowned anxiety, that's my key phrase. So you grow up believing that you need to take care of them. What happens for you is you sort of inherit the structures of their nervous system. You pattern, your body patterns your nervous system after their nervous system. So what that looks like is you spend time, because you don't feel safe, you spend time trying to control the external world, to manage what people think and do and feel, how they see you. If you grew up with anxious parenting, so that your nervous system develops in such a way that you have a baseline, a kind of a trait anxiety, then you'll spend your time trying to control things outside of you, because you will experience fear happening outside of you. You'll think that your fear is because of what your child is doing. You'll think that your fear is because of how your spouse is showing up. You'll think that your fear is due to the state of the world today. And so you'll enlist all of your resources to try to manage the outside world. But the problem, you see, is inside. The problem, the illness, if you will, is an internal problem. And so searching for solutions outside of you to deal with or to cope with a problem that's happening inside of you will never resolve. And that's why attempts to manage anxiety in this kind of externalized way often or eventually beget more and more anxiety until eventually you get to a point where you either surrender or your life is over, right? You develop diseases, heart issues, blood pressure issues. You carry it around in your body physically and you get sick. So the task is to heal your nervous system. But to do that, you first have to own and understand that the anxiety lives inside of you. You're not responsible for its creation inside of your body, but now it's your responsibility to deal with. We have to come to this understanding that if we want to understand childhood anxiety, and I hear people talk about in social media and in mainstream media all the time about the epidemic challenges of the youth of today. I hear people talk about the young generations with kind of what they might consider humorous derision. But children are just mirrors for the big people, the parents who raise them. So if we want to understand childhood anxiety, we must first understand the anxiety of the adults raising them. One thing became clear to me during the pandemic. My anxiety was high during the pandemic. I was triggered. My baseline anxiety, my trait anxiety was triggered by the state of events. And I was consuming copious amounts of news to try to soothe my anxiety. And I noticed this more vividly than maybe any other pattern in my parenting. I noticed that my children were getting overwhelmed by my anxiety about the state of the world. They asked me eventually to turn off the news, or at least turn it off while they were around, or to not talk about the state of the world with such great fear. And I think that experience that I had during the pandemic led me to the conclusion, or added to the hypothesis that I have, that really what we're dealing with today is not an epidemic of childhood mental health problems, but rather an epidemic of parent problems that have gone unaddressed up to this point. And so if we're to follow the ideas that I'm talking about tonight, we talk about going back to the parent and helping them to own and deal with and do the work of looking inside, unraveling their own histories, spending a lot of time in 12-step groups, support groups, or psychotherapy so that they can borrow the regulated nervous systems of the other adults in those settings, and they can reparent themselves. When my therapist said to me some years ago, after I complained about what felt like the temporary benefit of psychotherapy with her, she said, eventually you'll carry around a copy of me inside of you. And what she meant was, more than the ideas or the voice in my head, which also was there, she meant essentially the nervous system that she had. Repeated chronic exposure to her as my therapist sort of replaced the programming and conditioning that I experienced from my mother, who was definitely overwhelmed and anxious raising us 3 boys. Ultimately, we think about psychotherapy much more in terms of why you're doing what you're doing than we think about what you're doing. When I'm talking with somebody about working with them through a decision, I don't pay attention to the decision that they're making as much as I want to explore the motives. Is this coming from a place of fear, from a lack of safety? Or is it coming from a place of feeling love, compassion, empathy? And I've concluded that there really are no rules when I think about mental health. There's just love and fear, these two kind of primordial forces, energies in the universe. And it's of course, as any one statement would be it's an oversimplification of the complexities of life. But I like to think about it this way. There's no rules. There's no list of check boxes that work for everybody. There's no pattern or approach that's going to guarantee everybody that to anybody that they'll get what they want. There's love and there's fear. And we either come to deal with our relationship to fear. We take it out, we discover it, we talk about it, we look at it, we understand how it moves through us. We either do that or it runs our lives. It directs virtually everything that we do. And because the vast majority of fuel that motivates us is unconscious, the work takes often some help and support from an outsider. Somebody else that can see us and gently introduce us to ourselves over a long period of time. Checklists, directives, advice, and rules never quite do the trick when it comes to our anxiety. As I often teach, mental health can be understood in a large way is our ability to deal with uncertainty, anxiety. So if we can't deal with anxiety, if we can't deal with uncertainty, the solution is not to double down on our efforts to control, but it is to find the source of our suffering, which, as I've indicated both from my introduction and from what I'm teaching, have its roots in our childhood experiences, in the attachment with our parents. We can all understand why parents struggle so much with fear when it comes to raising children. Especially in a time, and this could be true of virtually any time in history, although it seems like the pace of change today is greater than anything we've observed. We understand that parents who are raising children today are overwhelmed with threats, are overwhelmed with what possibly could go wrong, with the drugs that are available, with social media and its impact on the psyche, with the impact on a smartphone on a developing child that we don't even have the idea to understand how it impacts them. Online games and online things that draw children away from connection, draw them into a virtual world. We have compassion for why children are drawn to that, because it's a world that they can more easily manage or more easily control, present themselves in ways that they want to present themselves so that they can be seen in the ways that they want to be seen. But the issue, folks, for all of us, for me, for you, for all of us, the issue that is the most important thing for us to focus on is this thing inside of us. This nervous system that is running the show and really through which we see the world. I remember when I was in undergraduate school, actually, one of my first classes on family systems, my professor articulated this wonderful model that had 4 different categories to talk about the various families. Families that come from strict authoritarian families, families that come from more democratic families, families that come from chaotic families. And I can't remember what the 4th category was. And I remember her saying, after teaching this model for well over an hour, she said, but if the family has a lot of anxiety, all of this goes out the door. Anxiety trumps and supersedes all of this. And I remember in my early 20s thinking, well, what's she talking about? What kind of families are those? Surely not my family. I can't relate to this. And why would something like anxiety be such a overwhelming factor in understanding how families operate and how children develop? Now, 30 years later, it's obvious to me. Our relationship to fear, our relationship to anxiety, and how we see the world through that lens is going to be more impactful than virtually anything else I can talk to you about. When I teach about anxiety or other things, and people ask me specific behaviors, my answer is always, it depends. The behavior that you're describing is not necessarily innately harmful or helpful. It depends on the energy, the reason, what consciousness, what idea that this approach is being used within. And if it's an attempt to take care of parental anxiety simply, there's a value in slowing down and asking more questions. Parental anxiety and the nervous system. I often teach that the most important tool that you can bring to parenting, or that your parents could have brought to you, is your regulated nervous system. If you're operating from love, from connection, from clarity, from awareness, from safety, in other words, the absence of fear, if you're operating from that place, it's hard to get it wrong. And if you're operating from fear, it's nearly impossible. If that's clouding it, it's nearly impossible to get it right. Carl Jung, I share this all the time, famously suggested that the greatest burden that a child carries is the unlived life of the parent. And while that idea that he shared can have many applications, it definitely has applications to anxiety. If you don't take responsibility, if I don't take responsibility for my life, my children will have to carry burdens, unhealed traumas that I'm not even conscious of transmitting to them. It's not about feeling hurt or scared or worried. It's about whether or not you can own it. And that, to me, is the most comforting part of this. If you take responsibility for it, if you know, I've often said I didn't know I was anxious until I was around 40 years old. I mean, I knew I had anxiety at times, but I didn't know that I was carrying around so much trait anxiety. I was masking it with my over-functioning intellectual abilities, my productiveness, my accomplishments, all did very well to hide from me the fact that had been fighting my entire life just for a sense of worthiness and safety. And now today I realize that anxiety doesn't look maybe like what people might think is classic anxiety. My anxiety looks like intensity, frustration, anger, agitation, complaining, criticism, being a really critical kind of schoolmaster to my children. And when my family members, which they do often, talk about how my anxiety gets on them in the form of my intensity, I will say to them, at times, if it doesn't feel gaslighting and they feel heard, they feel safe, I'll tell them, I believe you. I know how hard it must be to live under that regime, because I live under it too. I have this fantasy that if I can get it right, if I can do everything perfectly and efficiently, then I won't suffer. That's what my insecure attachment communicated to me. So it can look like effusive praise. Anxiety can look like effusive praise. Parents that go on and on, lathering praise and affection on their children. The words sound nurturing and positive. But if those expressions originate from parental anxiety of the child's self-esteem, from the parent's anxiety of the child not feeling loved, then what gets communicated to the child is not confidence, but fear. Parents who will over-communicate effusive praise, when brains are studied of children, they respond in the same way that the child brain responds to when they are frightened or threatened. And why is that? It's because at some level the child can sense unconsciously the fact that the parent is really afraid and really scared. And the child grows up confused, not knowing the difference between love and fear, and believing that they need to accomplish something or be something that they're not, to help and soothe the parent. Sometimes anxiety can look like Sharing I feel statements with your children. You know, if we share feelings with our spouses or our children, and there's a hope that the child or the spouse or the friend or the sibling or the colleague will change simply because I'm upset. We are in essence telling them, I'm scared and you're the solution to my fear. So why share at all? Well, that's a really good question to ask before you share. What's my intent? If my intent is to own it, to take it off of you, that's one thing. If my intent is to hand it to you so that you know how to make me feel not afraid, not upset, not angry, not disappointed, then all I'm communicating is leading to harm. So sharing emotions is something I ask parents when speaking to children to pause about. I probably have said in therapy with clients this week at least 5 times. This is a great place to come to complain. To complain about your spouse, to complain about your children. This is a good place to vent. I can hold it. But your children really can't. Not effectively. Not and develop in a healthy way. And for most spouses, some of what you're expressing can be very difficult to hear. So bring it to me, a safe person, a confidential person. And then go back to your child, go back to your spouse. A little bit lighter, a little bit less afraid, a little bit less undernourished. Go back to them in that state so you can be available to what they need. Essentially, children interpret parental disowned anxiety as something's wrong with me. The child experiences the parent's distress as I'm wrong and bad. I'm hurting the person that loves me the most for some reason. Something I did, something I'm doing. And I'm responsible for that. Unowned parental anxiety, in my experience, falls under that category that Jung talks about, the unlived life of a parent, falls under that category. And thus, parental anxiety for me is the most specific way we can describe what is the greatest burden for a child to carry. The child's nervous system develops in the context of the parent's nervous system of the big people. And if the parent is afraid and not owning it, not taking responsibility, not getting help, not going to meetings, the child will own that, think something's wrong with them, and they'll spend their life trying to solve the problem that's inside of them by managing everybody outside of them, just like their parents were doing, just like their grandparents were doing, and so on. Resilience, self-esteem, mental health are closely related to the parent's ability to take responsibility for their feelings, to get support for those feelings, to get resources for those feelings, and then show up to the child with capacity, to see the child, to respond to the child's needs from a place of confidence and clarity. So when I look at somebody, for example, struggling with boundaries, it's not that having a clear boundary is going to solve the problem. It's doing the healing work so that you can set a boundary that will address and help heal the problem. It's not eradicating your codependency because your codependency is the cause of or the cure for the child. It's eradicating your codependency so you then can become a resource to your child instead of a liability, instead of something that continues to cost them on top of whatever they're struggling with, cost them their serenity. Showing up with a regulated nervous system, even especially perhaps in times of stress, communicates to the child that they're okay. That it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to screw up. In fact, it's critical. Just what the doctor ordered in terms of development. The child has to experiment, to fail over and over again, just like we did. But if our anxious attachment is going unaddressed, undealt with, we will communicate to the child that their mistakes, their setbacks, their detours are very, very dangerous. And so what they need for their development will be, in essence, scared out of them. The best way I wrote to support your anxious child is to tend to your own nervous system first. Parental anxiety that is not owned by the parent will be experienced by the child as something is wrong with me. Wanting to control other people, to make them live as we'd have them live, makes the attainment of serenity impossible. It is at the root of anxiety. So we go to meetings where they utter the serenity prayer. For those of you who don't know it, I'll read it to you now. You can think of it as a meditation if you don't have a higher power. Just think of it as a meditation. Grant me this serenity. The prayer goes, God, grant me this serenity to accept the things I cannot change. The courage to change the things I can and the wisdom to know the difference. And in most 12-step support groups of any kind, whether it be for addiction or codependency, being the family member of an addict, that prayer is said by the entire group at the conclusion of the meeting, over and over again, day after day, week after week, year after year. Because it goes against our programming. In Western civilization, we think that we can solve all of life's problems. We don't know that some problems are unsolvable. Some pain is necessary. Some grief is necessary if we are to have a rich life full of connection. In Western civilization, we take a pill. We find a workaround or a hack. So we say the serenity prayer, or we meditate on the serenity prayer so that we can focus on what we are in control of, which is this thing, this body, this person that we are. And I'm not saying controlling that is easy, but it's the only thing that we can be really effective at over the long run. Or that we stop trying to control things that we can't, which is anything but us. And even though that seems so elementary and simple, it's so hard to hold on to that. We have to pray at the end of the prayer for the wisdom to know the difference between me and everybody else. I was thinking about this, one of my favorite rock songs, one of my favorite songs of all time, from Pink Floyd, Wish You Were Here. And he says, can you tell the difference between a field and a cold steel rail? Can you feel the difference between heaven and hell? His question is, how much can you see? How much are you present? How much can you really see? Because most people don't see what's happening. They're too caught up in the story. They're too swept away by their own fears. I love the part of the I feel statement that I've been teaching for years with the program that I worked in, where we talk about what I can hope for myself, what can I change is within my control, and what I hope for others that I can't change. When we added those two elements to our version of the feeling statement in our communication education, I had some pushback initially from my partners who were developing this with me, and they said, we don't want to give the tool to families to express a hope for something outside of their control. And my response was, they're going to hope for it anyway. Making it explicit won't make it more insidious and more powerful. In fact, naming it, making it more conscious, and acknowledging that you're not in control of it, excuse me, acknowledging that you're not in control of it takes away, excuse me, takes away most of its power. So we name what we're not in control of as a meditation, as a practice. But in the end, unless we take responsibility for our own serenity or lack of it, and that is to first own it, to name it if we can, but then to go about tending to it, until we do that, we will transmit small t trauma to our children in ways that we are not conscious of. And that transmission of small t trauma will mean that any big T trauma, any big events in their lives will have a much more negative impact on their mental health. Because small T trauma, or the lack of it, is the real basis of our mental health. The big T trauma is just stuff that happens. And everybody's going to experience some big T trauma in their life. But the difference that occurs in children who have one person that can see them, show up with a regulated nervous system, and attend to the child, that makes all the difference in the world. Then the big T traumas, according to the research, don't seem to have the impact, the cause on mental health problems. One of my favorite things that I often share goes like this. You were wounded, more than some and less than others, but you were hurt. And the way you protect that pain hurts others. Most pointedly, your children. So work on yourself and discover that your fear, your hurt, and your anger are yours. Take them back so your children don't have to carry them. This is the greatest love that you can give, and it will multiply. Your children will bring even greater healing to their children, and in this very simple way, your love multiplies through eternity, through the generations. So, talk a little bit about the paradox of anxiety. We have to identify it, to own it, versus projecting it onto others or the outside world. Get support for it. Go to therapy. Go to support groups. Some 12-step groups, which again, if you are listening and psychotherapy is prohibitive because of the cost, 12-step groups are a wonderful substitute. CODA.org, Al-Anon.org, Parents Anonymous, FamiliesAnonymous.org. Further, if you can, get a sponsor. Somebody who's farther along on this journey than you are, who can give you one-on-one support. Oftentimes, when a therapist couldn't. Meditation, the act of slowing down and connecting to the body and learning to feel our emotions, to be with what is. That can be a really helpful and life-changing process or practice. Reading, studying, listening to this podcast, getting connected to these ideas, finding a higher power, connecting yourself to a story, plugging yourself into it, so that connection to the story, to a higher power, gives you a why. And as Nietzsche and Viktor Frankl taught, if you have a why, you can bear almost any how. Surrender ultimately is a part of this. For those of you who have watched, and I'll do my best not to create any spoilers. If you haven't seen the Odyssey, you might want to turn me off for about 30 seconds. I'll try to be careful. But the ultimate act that Odysseus had to engage in was surrender. He had to come to the realization that by his own will, by trying to control everything and everybody, he would never find peace or never find home. And in the interpretation that my people, the people that I study, make about the Odyssey, the story is about not returning home literally. It's about returning home to yourself, to who you are. So surrender is an important part of it. Find a community. Ultimately, find safety. And with that community and that safety, you can learn to be more honest with yourself, more courageous. You can't avoid hurt. You can't avoid worry. You can't avoid pain. When it comes to relationships, you'll experience all of those. But you can take responsibility for those feelings. And if you don't, then you will fall under the umbrella that we talk about when we say hurt people hurt people. If you don't attend to your own healing, you will hurt the people around you even more. This is your journey and how you were raised. And it's not their fault. We're not looking for somebody to blame. We can trace this back to our parents' parents and their parents' parents, and so on and so forth. We can connect it to the culture, the zeitgeist, the time that they lived in, the circumstances. The pandemic is a huge impact on the mental health of families these days. Wars, catastrophes, all of those leave their mark. So you've got plenty of work to do, but the work is not really about fixing your child or fixing your marriage. Those, I guess, abilities, capacities, come out of this self-work. And if you don't attend to the wounds that you're carrying, the unhealed wounds, the nervous system, the imperfect nervous system that you inherited, if you don't attend to those things, you'll convince yourself that the only thing that exists is what is conscious. And the things, the issues that you haven't attended to will run your life. And you'll call it fate. You'll think that it's happening to you. In ways, this is a gift. Our children, our relationships wake us up to what we've been avoiding thus far. Our parents had the same opportunity, and some of them took it and some of them didn't. But if you want to be a part of this process, if you want to be that cycle breaker, then you got to go back. You got to look. You got to come into emotional contact with your history. And then you feel safe. You're transformed. The voices outside of you get quieter. It becomes less important what people think and feel about you. But you do it with compassion and love and non-judgment. Your thinking tends to be less polarized, less black and white, either or, us and them. You get comfortable with gray, with ambiguity. You can tolerate it now because your nervous system is regulated and healed. And you experience what we talk about when we say the bird that stands on the top of a tree on a thin branch doesn't stand there confidently because it trusts the tree. It stands there because it trusts its wings. You will trust your wings. You'll be the one that comes to rescue you from despair and from anxiety as you transform. A lot of people spend time wishing that things would happen differently, things that they want to get back to the mainstream, back on course, back to the way it was. This shouldn't be happening. But the more we stop accepting what is happening that's outside of our control, the more we miss the gifts that those experiences have to offer us, the gold, the treasure that those experiences have to offer us. So the best news, as always, on this podcast is that you're not the problem for everybody else, but you're your problem. But the best part of that is you're also your solution. You don't have to do it alone. In fact, I would recommend you not try that unless you feel like you need to see if it'll work. Find other people. Go to groups where other people struggle with children. Go to a therapy session with a therapist who's interested in finding you and understanding you and not fixing you. Because if you find a therapist that's interested in fixing you, you probably have recreated your childhood. Harriet Lerner wrote in The Dance of Fear, "The more you try to make fear go away, an impossible dream," she says. Rather than learning to function with it, the worse you'll feel about yourself. You'll let fear stop you from doing what you need to do. You will mistakenly see yourself as a weak and impaired individual rather than as a strong, competent person who happens to have an overactive fear response. As always, a critical catalyst is going to be self-compassion and self-love. Judgment comes from fear. Judgment comes from this place where we want to control things. We want to put them in categories that are more easily manageable. But self-compassion embraces the mess that we all are. The beautiful, miraculous mess that we all are. So your self-awareness will only be as good as your self-compassion. And the way you can recognize your lack of self-compassion, the best way to recognize it, watch your judgments towards other people. When you find yourself being judgmental towards other people, that's the clearest indication of where your work lies. That's a clear indication of the parts of yourself you haven't made peace with yet. When anxiety operates as a chronic underground force, we may fail to identify it as the culprit behind our functioning. We just feel bad about ourselves, which of course revs up our anxiety even more. Again, that's Harriet Lerner. No matter the difficulty, it's imperative that we develop a practice and a position towards ourselves of self-love. Failure to embody this position of self-love will lead to more pain, loss, and unnecessary suffering. It will lead to denial, to us shoving into the unconscious more of the parts of ourself that we have been taught are unacceptable. So we develop a practice, right? That's the best we can do. It's a practice of self-compassion. We go to places where we can confess the examples of how our horrible, rotten self has made a mess of things. And if we're in a safe place, the folks or the individuals there will embrace us with non-judgment and say, you're in the right place. You're welcome here. Our relationship to boundaries and anxiety is important to understand. Anxiety often compromises our boundaries. So in other words, boundaries are critical to managing anxiety. We must face the parts of ourselves, our guilt and shame, and embrace what's within our control to create a world that feels safer to us. We have to face the things we've been told not to do and not to be to find safety. If getting healthier was easy and painless, everybody would do it. I wanted to share this maybe radical take before I begin to conclude, and that is, if you approach a loved one and ask them how they feel, hoping that their answer will soothe your anxiety, then you're coming to take and not to give. It would be better if you simply didn't ask them. And I think in marriage, I see that a lot. People ask their partner, what are you feeling? What do you think about what I just shared? And they're hoping to be soothed. Don't ask the people that you love how they feel until you're ready to hold it. And it's okay to make a mistake. I do it all the time. I think I'm ready to hold it, and then I get triggered, and I need to take a time out. Or I blow up and have to apologize and make a repair later. So anxiety is something that if we don't address, fear is something that if we don't address, we don't understand our relationship to fear. It will color all of our relationships, all of our choices, our sense of self, our self-awareness, all of it. So what are the take-homes? Self-compassion is the catalyst. Find somebody interested in understanding you and finding you, not interested in finding you and fixing you. Find resources, community, and support where you can. Develop enough safety that you can own your limitations. It is so easy to live with someone who can own their horrible, rotten self. And it is exhausting and ultimately untenable to live with people who can't. Avoid the I can handle anything mistake. Yes, you have broad shoulders. Yes, some of you made it through a childhood where your needs were neglected and you can handle it. But ultimately it will come out sideways, out the back door. It will leak. Learn to say no. Take on less. Find a way to be present with people without needing to fix them, or take space, go to your practice until you can. It's hard for me to imagine. I know there are ways, but it's hard for me to imagine this process, this journey, this healing path outside of a therapeutic setting. I know it's possible with meditation, with mindfulness practices, with support groups for sure. but I can think of no better place to recreate your childhood in a positive way. To find a therapist who becomes the parent that you did not have. To go to a place on a weekly basis that is the home that you did not have. And then you develop safety. And then from that safety, then you can make the difficult decisions. Then you can utilize the tools in the service of this new consciousness. Go to support groups for family members of those that are struggling. If you have somebody that's struggling, do your work first. Do your work first. Family therapy, couples therapy is more advanced. It's kind of like the graduate school level of therapy, in my opinion. And I have a PhD and a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, so I was taught and conditioned in my formal education to treat systems and couples. But I realize that some people aren't ready for that yet. Some people have some fundamental work to do before those exercises, those activities can be most effective. Exercise, making happiness and your serenity your responsibility. Learning to take vacations, time off from your problem. You attending to yourself, even though it's going to cause you guilt. Even though you're going to be accused of being selfish or abandoning people. You attending to what you need is one of the greatest ways to show love to the people that you care about in your circle. Because if you don't take care of yourself in an effort to be a good spouse, a good parent, a good person, if you don't take care of yourself because you convince yourself you don't have the problem, you don't need it. If you don't take care of yourself because of guilt and shame, the people around you will be left to carry what is not theirs. They'll be left to carry the energy, the effect, the dynamics that are the result of your own unhealed history. All right, folks. Like I mentioned, Finding You Intensive is a great springboard. August 5th through 9th, September 9th through 13th. I'll be hosting with my wife November 11th through 15th a Couples Intensive. It may be full. Check it out. We would open up a second iteration of this group if we get this one full. So check it out. For all other inquiries for private intensives for couples or families, if you want to attend our support group, the next one is August 19th. If you're an alumni of our program, the third Wednesday of each month is set aside for an alumni Finding You support group. Or if you want to attend the Finding You, meaning that the Other Parents Like Me program has created Saturday mornings at 9:30 a.m. Mountain Time, contact us via our email website, our email, info@findingyouprograms, or our website portal. We can also help connect you with a coach or a therapist who can help you in this work. If you want to join me and Emma at the Art of Living Retreat Center, October 27th through October 2nd, at our Audacity to Be You, Learning to Love Your Horrible, Rotten Self workshop, go to their website, artoflivingretreatcenter.org. Also, we can help you connect. I'll be back next week, next Tuesday, and I'm going to be talking about the heroic skill of listening and what it means when I use the word heroic in the context of our mundane human existence as parents and partners. That's Tuesday, August 4th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. I look forward to that. Thank you for joining me. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. And for and on behalf of those that you love and those that love you, thanks for showing up to these kinds of things, for doing your work, for owning that you need help, because you doing that makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.